She couldn't believe what she was looking at. The sample showed her evidence that she had never considered. She repeated it just in case, with the same result. Sloan found the answers she never knew she needed from the girl they had found. This showed a new perspective on the world that had once been. Viviane Sloan loved her job as a paleogeneticist, but she had no idea what she would find in her lab in Leipzig, Germany. Viviane always wondered where humanity's roots came from. She was always looking for evidence, which would lead her to a startling discovery. Scientists looked in a cave in Siberia in 2012 and found a piece of ancient bone. The bone was overlooked and thrown into a pile of other fossils. The bone was seen as just an ordinary sample of an early human species called Denisova. At the time Denisova was discovered, researchers found a bone and a tooth in the Altai Mountains. These would come from the very same species, Denisova. There are a number of hominins recorded to date. The earliest known human ancestors date back to more than 4 million years ago. The first of our ancestors to walk on their hind legs were Australopithecines. These people evolved in ancient Africa. Homo sapiens evolved around 250,000 years ago. But Sloan needed to find more. She would go to any means to find it. The bone was lying among many animal fossils from the same Siberian cave. Sloan enlisted the help of her colleagues to look at some of the specimens they had. The simple cataloging would lead to an amazing discovery. When she saw the sample of bone and what DNA it contained, she couldn't believe it had been overlooked in the first place. Sloan had no idea that what she was looking at would change everything. She thought that she had seen it all, but clearly she was mistaken. One of her favorite species was Homo heidelbergensis that evolved around 700,000 years ago. The species emerged from Africa and Eurasia, Europe and Asia. They looked more or less like modern humans, but laid the foundations for all other Homo species. They were different from any other species that came before them. Sloan loved this change in evolution. Neanderthals only evolved 40,000 years ago, and their DNA can be found in people who come from Europe or Asia. This is because they bred with Homo sapiens. Sloan was curious about how the two species interact and how the world worked at the time. Then she found an amazing clue. Sloan's colleagues studied the bone fragment as instructed and immediately asked for her help. The sequence in the DNA wasn't like the Denisova sample she was expecting. She stared at the sample, puzzled over what went wrong. That's when Sloan came to lend her expertise and help her colleague understand what was occurring in the DNA. Or, more aptly, to discover what secret the DNA was hiding. When Sloan analyzed the DNA present in the bone's mitochondria, she had no idea what was waiting for her. The bone fragment was just 1 inch in size, but she could already tell something for certain. The DNA indicated that it belonged to a teenage girl who was about 15 years old. At first, the bone looked like it belonged to Denisova, but something didn't quite add up. Sloan grabbed more equipment and began to analyze the nuclear DNA. This was already very exciting, Sloan told National Geographic. It only got more exciting when we started looking at the nuclear DNA. That's when we realized there was something a bit funky about this bone, Sloan continued. Sloan's knowledge on genetics told her that material is passed down by both the mom and dad. It wasn't enough to know who this bone belonged to, but where she came from and who her parents were. Sloan excitedly got to work, but nothing could have prepared her for the shock of making a monumental scientific discovery. When she studied the results at first, she thought she had made a mistake. She redid the analysis again and again before coming to the realization that she had stumbled upon something extraordinary. While studying the bone fragment, she realized that the ancient girl's genetic makeup was incredibly diverse. Her heterozygosity was incredibly high. For relatives, heterozygosity would present in DNA as relatively meager. For unrelated but same species, it would present higher but still relatively small. But in this ancient girl, the presence of heterozygosity at an alarmingly high rate could only mean one thing. Slan's eyes grew wide as she looked at the test analysis for the final time. She had discovered one of the holy grails in human evolution. Slan discovered that this bone fragment belonged to a first-generation child of interbreeding between two different species. Who were her parents? The analysis showed that this girl was the love child of a dad who was a Denisovan and a mom who was a Neanderthal. But how was it even possible? We knew from previous studies that Neanderthals and Denisovans must have occasionally had children together, Slan told London newspaper The Evening Standard. But I never thought we would be so lucky as to find an actual offspring of the two groups. Geneticist David Reich, who worked at Harvard University, agreed. It's amazing to be able to find something like this, Reich said to National Geographic. It seemed unlikely that we would be able to catch it happening in the act, an individual that's really the product of a first-generation hybrid. However, how is interbreeding possible without resulting in deformities in the offspring? A well-known example is the mule, which is bred by a donkey, and a horse can be born relatively healthy. However, it will always be infertile, preventing it from producing young of its own. But there are other species which defy the deformities of interbreeding, which give us clues as to how the Denisovan and Neanderthal managed to mix. Here are 5 that shed some light on the mystery. Scientists took a peek into the DNA of 144 Guenon monkeys. The idea was to find out why the two groups had such distinct features. They found that the unique evolution was not because of separate breeding within the two distinct species of ape. In fact, the red monkeys and blue ones were naturally creating hybrid babies, and not in the confines of a zoo. Looking further into this interesting group, researchers found that the original inhabitants were the red monkeys. The area was later invaded by the blue ones. Both sides didn't seem to mind the stark differences in appearance. This brings the first key that's vital to understanding where we came from: habitat changes that force migration. The cross between a grizzly bear and a polar bear is also called a prisley. Cute, right? The hybrids were first found in the wild. Then the zoos decided to try and breed the new pairing in captivity. The reason, however, is quite sad, to the point where they shouldn't have existed at all. The new species bred out of desperation. Due to the melting ice shelves, the polar bears were forced to migrate anywhere with solid land. Also, both sides had their habitats destroyed to the point where they couldn't find food. So, the second factor is climate change. This crossbreed comes from a male wolf and female coyotes. The interesting thing is that the offspring remains fertile, so it's not like a mule. They babies grow up to look larger than their mothers, but with features less like the father. They're also adept at survival. But this comes with a prince. Because both sides' roaming grounds have got smaller, they've started to invade each other's territory. They breed so much that scientists had to go out and sterilize some of the females because they were worried the pure strain of wolf DNA would be irreversibly diluted. Holphins come from a female dolphin, Tursiops truncatus, and a male false killer whales, Pseudoarca crassidens. These hybrids, however, are incredibly rare, more so than the other examples on this list. The first recorded one was in Tokyo SeaWorld in 1981, but he died after 200 days. It was first believed that the pairing would end up with infertile offspring. Years later, they found out it wasn't the case. The mother and babies had a really hard time. Either the calves wouldn't live very long, or the mother wouldn't feed them. Some specialists think it's because the female gave birth too early in life. The last example is unbelievable. These amazing hybrids actually are a combination of female land iguana and male marine iguanas. That's right, water and land have finally come together. The babies have distinct features from both parents, but the reason why they managed to join comes from a delicate balance of conditions. In this case, Mother Nature gave the green light to these boys and girls because it was a better way to survive the harsh conditions surrounding the Galapagos Islands. The marine iguanas couldn't find enough seaweed, their staple food, but even though there was plenty of food on land, it was too hard for them to traverse the rocky shores. So, they made children that had the best of both worlds. This all brings us back to our story of the two humanoids. Between harsh conditions, climate alterations, and habitat changes, we see that nature can usually find a way to adapt. Or to quote the famous Jurassic Park, life finds a way. One can only imagine what happened long ago to bring Denisovan and Neanderthal together. As for Slan, it was a groundbreaking breadcrumb of human history and discovery she will never forget. Did you like this touching and surprising story? If so, we invite you to leave us a comment expressing your opinion. If you want to continue enjoying inspiring stories like this one, subscribe to our channel or check out the other videos shown at the bottom of the screen. Thank you for your cooperation.